Commander Vex-High Thule stood before the young Zephyrian cadets, his 3 eyes scanning their eager faces. The scars on his blue-scaled skin told stories of countless battles. His left arm ended at the elbow, a reminder of the war that had changed everything. "You think you know what war is," Thule said, his voice deep and rough. "You think you understand combat, but you have never fought humans. I have. I will tell you why they are the most feared species in the galaxy." The cadets leaned forward in their seats. Stories of the Third Galactic War were legendary, but few veterans spoke of their experiences. The first time I met humans in battle was on Kepler 442b. A mining planet. Nothing special about it, just rocks and metal ore. My commanders told us it would be easy. 300 of our best shock troops against 12 human defenders. We expected to finish the job in 6 hours. Thule's voice grew quiet. It took 4 days. 4 days of hell. The mining colony sat in a valley surrounded by red mountains. The humans had built their base around the main mining shaft with metal buildings connected by covered walkways. It looked weak, fragile, the perfect target for a quick strike. "We came down in assault ships at dawn," Thule continued. "The plan was simple. Surround the base, demand surrender. If they refused, we would destroy them and take what we needed." Lieutenant Jake Morrison was the human commander. Thule had studied the intelligence files before the attack. Morrison was young, maybe 30 human years. He had served in 2 other conflicts, but nothing major. His team was small and inexperienced. The files said they would surrender quickly when faced with overwhelming force. The files were wrong. "Morrison spoke to us over the radio when we landed," Thule said. His voice was calm, too calm. He said they would not surrender. He said they had civilians to protect. 2,000 miners, and their families were in the underground tunnels. He said we could not have them. The first attack came at noon. Thule's forces surrounded the base and opened fire with plasma weapons. The metal buildings should have melted like ice in the sun. Instead, the humans had reinforced everything: hidden armor plating, energy shields, defensive positions that appeared from nowhere. Sergeant Lisa Kane was Morrison's second in command. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she fought like a demon. When the first wave of Zephyrian soldiers reached the outer buildings, she was waiting for them. Her rifle never seemed to run out of ammunition. Her aim never missed. Kane took a plasma bolt to the shoulder in the first hour, Thule said. It should have killed her. Instead, she kept fighting. She used her wounded arm to steady her rifle while she fired with the other hand. I watched her kill 15 of my soldiers before she fell back to the next position. The battle should have been over by evening. Instead, it was just beginning. Corporal Danny Cruz was the explosives expert. He had rigged the entire base with hidden charges and traps. Every door could become a bomb. Every corridor could collapse. The humans turned their own home into a maze of death. Cruz was hit by shrapnel in the second hour, Thule remembered. A piece of metal as big as my hand went through his chest. He pulled it out and kept working. He used his own blood to mark which charges were ready to blow. Private Amy Foster was the youngest of the defenders. She was 19 years old and had been a soldier for less than a year. She should have been the first to break under pressure. Instead, she became something else entirely. Foster was shot through the stomach during the third assault, Thule said. The wound was fatal. Any rational being would have found cover and waited for medical help. Instead, she charged our position with a grenade in each hand. She was running on pure will. She should have been dead, but she kept fighting for 17 more minutes. The young cadets stared at Thule in disbelief. One of them spoke up. Commander, that is impossible. No one can fight with wounds like that. Thule's eyes fixed on the cadet. That is what I thought too. But humans do not follow the rules of biology. They do not follow the rules of war. They follow something else entirely. By the second day, Thule's forces had lost over 100 soldiers. The humans had lost none. Morrison's team kept falling back to prepared positions. Every retreat was covered by devastating fire. Every new position was stronger than the last. We brought in heavy weapons, Thule said. Artillery, bombers. We turned the surface of the base into a crater. But the humans had gone underground. They were fighting from the mining tunnels. Every shaft was a fortress. Every chamber was a trap. The underground war was worse than the surface battle. The tunnels were narrow and dark. Zephyrian soldiers had to advance in single file. The humans knew every passage, every dead end, every way in and out. They would appear from the shadows, strike, and vanish before anyone could react. Kane lost. Her left arm on the second day, Thule continued. A direct hit from a plasma cannon. She tied off the bleeding with her belt and kept fighting. She used the severed arm as a club while she fired her rifle one-handed. I have never seen anything like it. The third day brought the fuel depot explosion. Crews had been defending the main mining shaft when Thule's forces finally broke through. The human was surrounded, outnumbered 40-1. Any reasonable soldier would have surrendered. Crews climbed on top of the fuel depot instead. He looked right at me, Thule said. Blood running down his face, holes in his armor. He should have been dead hours ago. But he smiled. He actually smiled. Then he pulled the pin on his last grenade. The explosion could be heard for miles. The fuel depot went up like a small star. The blast took out 40 Zephyrian soldiers and collapsed half the tunnel system. It should have killed Cruz instantly. It took him 3 minutes to die. He used those 3 minutes to trigger the evacuation alarm, Thule said. Even while he was burning, he was thinking about the civilians. 2,000 miners and their families escaped through the back tunnels while we were dealing with the explosion. By the fourth day, only 3 humans were left alive: Morrison, Kane, and Foster. The mining base was destroyed. The tunnels were collapsed. The surface was a wasteland of craters and twisted metal. The humans kept fighting. Morrison was hit by shrapnel in 12 places, Thule said. Kane was missing her left arm and had a hole in her chest. Foster had been shot 4 times and was running on stimulants and pure stubbornness. Any one of them should have been dead. All 3 of them were still coordinating defensive fire. The final assault came at sunset on the 4th day. Thule led it personally, with his remaining 150 soldiers. They found the 3 humans in the command center behind the last barricade. Morrison was still talking on the radio, confirming that the civilians had reached safety. Kane was reloading her rifle with one hand. Foster was setting up the last of their explosives. Surrender, Thule had called out. You have fought well, you have honor. But it is over. Morrison looked up from his radio. His young face was covered in blood and dirt. His uniform was torn and burned. But his eyes were clear and determined. We do not fight to win, Morrison said. We fight so others can live. The command center exploded 30 seconds later. All 3 humans died in the blast. They took 20 more Zephyrian soldiers with them. Thule stood in the ruins of the mining base, surrounded by the bodies of his soldiers. He had won the battle, but it felt like defeat. 300 elite troops had been reduced to less than 50. The humans had saved every civilian and died protecting them. That was my first lesson about human nature, Thule told the cadets. They do not fight like soldiers. They fight like guardians. They will die for people they have never met. They will sacrifice everything for an idea. One of the cadets raised his hand. But Commander, if they all died, how did you learn what Morrison said about fighting to protect others? Thule was quiet for a long moment. Because I was wrong. Morrison did not die in the explosion. He lived for 6 more hours, long enough for me to question him, long enough for him to tell me why humans fight, long enough for me to understand that winning against them is not about superior numbers or better weapons. The commander looked at each cadet in turn. It is about understanding that they are not trying to defeat you. They are trying to save everyone else. That makes them the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. The room was silent. The young Zephyrians stared at their instructor with new understanding. War was not about glory or conquest. It was about meeting an enemy who valued life more than victory. Tomorrow I will tell you about the ghost ship, Thule said. About humans who turned their own death into a weapon. About an enemy who showed mercy to those who showed them none. As the cadets filed out of the classroom, Thule remained behind. He touched the scar where his left arm used to be. Morrison had been the one to cut it off, trying to save his life after the explosion. Even in defeat, even dying, the human had tried to help his enemy. That was the most terrifying thing of all. The next day, Commander Thule returned to face his cadets. The young Zephyrians sat quietly, still thinking about the mining colony story. Their instructor looked tired, as if the memories kept him awake at night. 6 months after the mining colony, Thule began. My superiors gave me a new assignment: deep space patrol in the Vega sector. Our job was to hunt human raiders who were attacking supply convoys. Intelligence said they were using fast ships to strike and disappear before we could respond. Thule activated a holographic display showing a battered human destroyer. The ship was dark, with holes in its hull and debris floating around it. We found the Valiant Dawn drifting in empty space. Our sensors showed massive damage. Hull breaches, on 3 decks, life support failing, no energy signatures from weapons or engines. The ship appeared to be dead. The cadets studied the image. The human vessel looked like it had been through hell. Scorch marks covered the hull where plasma weapons had hit. One of the main engines was completely destroyed. Standard protocol demanded we board the ship, Thule continued. Dead or not, human vessels always contained valuable intelligence. Ship logs, navigation data, communication records. My commanders wanted everything. Thule had selected 50 of his best soldiers for the boarding party. They were veterans who had survived multiple engagements. Each one carried heavy weapons and wore full combat armor. Against a crew of 30 humans on a dying ship, it should have been more than enough. Captain Ben Harper commanded the Valiant Dawn, Thule said. His file showed 20 years of service. A good officer, but nothing special. His crew was standard military. Engineers, gunners, communication specialists. None of them were elite troops. The boarding began at 800 hours. Thule's soldiers cut through the outer hull and entered through the cargo bay. Emergency lighting flickered red in the darkness. The air was thin and cold. Everything looked abandoned. Our scanners showed no life signs, Thule explained. The ship's computer systems were offline. We could hear the hull creaking as it slowly broke apart. It felt like walking through a tomb. Commander Rachel Torres was Harper's executive officer. She had been with the ship for 5 years and knew every system, every passage, every hiding spot. When the humans decided to turn their dying vessel into a trap, she became the architect of their plan. The first sign of trouble came when Thule's advance team reached the bridge. The command center was empty, but all the control panels had been destroyed. Someone had taken great care to smash every screen, every keyboard, every piece of equipment that might contain useful data. Lieutenant Nick Russo was their weapons officer, Thule said. He had spent 3 days preparing surprises for us. Every doorway was a potential trap. Every corridor could become a kill zone. He used the ship's own failing systems as weapons. 2 soldiers disappeared between the cargo bay and the first deck. No weapons fire, no screams, just silence on the radio. Thule ordered his men to search in pairs, but that only made things worse. The humans had shut down all non-essential systems. To hide their heat signatures, they moved through maintenance shafts and damaged sections where the sensors could not track them. Captain Harper had trained his crew in meditation techniques that slowed their heart rates and made them nearly invisible to life sign detectors. Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan knew the ship better than anyone, Thule continued. She had been working on the Valiant Dawn for 8 years. She could move through the walls like a ghost. She had reprogrammed the automated systems to target anyone who was not human. The medical bay was Sullivan's masterpiece. When 6 of Thule's soldiers entered looking for medical supplies, the room sealed itself and flooded with sedative gas. The humans had converted their own medical equipment into a trap. The soldiers were unconscious in seconds, but they were not killed. When Thule's team found them later, the 6 soldiers were secured in the ship's brig. Someone had given them medical treatment for minor injuries and left them food and water. This was psychological warfare, Thule explained to his cadets. The humans were not just fighting us. They were making us question everything we thought we knew about them. Pirates and raiders do not take prisoners. They do not give medical care to enemies. They do not show mercy. The armory had been turned into a maze of explosives and debris. Lieutenant Russo had used his knowledge of weapon systems to create a puzzle that would kill anyone who tried to solve it wrong. But he had also left a clear path through the maze for anyone carrying wounded soldiers. The message was clear: fight us and die, but help others and live. By the third hour I had lost 20 soldiers, Thule said. Some were dead, some were unconscious, some had simply vanished. The humans were picking us off one by one, but they were following rules that made no sense. The engine room was where Thule finally encountered Captain Harper face to face. The human commander was working alone, his hands covered in grease and radiation burns. He was trying to repair the ship's reactor, not to escape, but to keep life support running for the prisoners. Harper looked up when Thule entered with his remaining soldiers. The human captain was in his 40s, with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting for 3 days without rest, but he stood straight and faced his enemies without fear. "You came for intelligence," Harper said calmly. "You can have it. Ship logs are in the computer core. Navigation data is in the bridge. Backup systems, communication records are in the radio room. Take what you want." Thule was confused. "Why would you tell us this?" Harper smiled sadly. "Because in 1 hour, none of it will matter." That was when Thule learned about the reactor overload. The Valiant. Dawn's power core had been damaged in the original battle that left the ship drifting. Chief Engineer Sullivan had been working for 3 days to keep it stable, but the radiation was slowly killing her. "The reactor will explode in 57 minutes, Harper explained. "Big enough to vaporize this ship and anything within 1,000 kilometers. My crew and I are staying to make sure it happens on schedule." The human captain had given Thule's soldiers exactly enough time to gather their wounded and escape. No more, no less. The humans were choosing to die rather than surrender, but they were making sure their enemies could save themselves. "Why warn us?" Thule asked. "Why give us time to escape?" Harper looked at the Zephyrian commander with those tired eyes. "Because your soldiers are following orders, just like mine. They do not deserve to die for our war." Commander Torres appeared from the shadows carrying a wounded Zephyrian soldier. She had been giving medical treatment to injured enemies while her own ship was dying around her. She set the soldier down gently and checked his bandages. 43 minutes, she reported to Harper. "All prisoners are stable for transport." "Lieutenant." Russo emerged from another passage, helping a limping Zephyrian soldier walk. The human weapons officer had spent the last hour searching for wounded enemies instead of preparing for battle. "The escape pods are loaded with medical supplies," Russo told Thule. "Your people will need them for the journey back to your ship." Chief Engineer Sullivan crawled out of a maintenance shaft, her face pale from radiation exposure. She was dying, but she had spent her last hours making sure the enemy prisoners would survive. 38 minutes, she said weakly. "The reactor is stable until then. After that?" She shrugged. Thule stared at the 4 humans. They were about to die, but they were using their final moments to save their enemies. It was beyond his understanding. "You could escape," Thule said. "Take the escape pods, live." Harper shook his head. "The reactor needs constant monitoring. If we leave, it could explode early. Your people would not have time to reach minimum safe distance. Besides," Torres added, "this ship has been our home for 5 years. If it has to die, we should die with it." Thule gathered his surviving soldiers and the rescued prisoners. As they prepared to leave, Harper handed him a data pad containing complete intelligence about human fleet movements, supply routes, and defensive positions. "Why?" Thule asked. "Because the war will end someday," Harper replied. "When it does, both sides will need to remember that we were soldiers, not monsters." The Zephyrian boarding party evacuated with 32 minutes to spare. As their shuttle pulled away from the Valiant Dawn, Thule watched the human ship growing smaller in the darkness. At exactly 1 hour after Harper's warning, the Valiant Dawn exploded. The reactor overload lit up the void like a small star, vaporizing the ship and its crew instantly. 30 humans died that day, Thule told his cadets. They died to save 28 enemy soldiers they had never met before. They gave us intelligence that helped end the war 6 months early. They showed mercy to people who had shown them none. One of the cadets raised her hand. Commander, why did this frighten you more than the mining colony battle? Thule was quiet for a moment. Because at the mining colony, the humans died protecting their own people. On the Valiant Dawn, they died protecting us. Their enemies. That level of compassion should make them weak, but somehow it made them the most dangerous opponents we ever faced. Another cadet spoke up. How can mercy be dangerous? Because it changes you, Thule replied. After the ghost ship, my soldiers began to question everything. If humans could show mercy to enemies, what did that make us? If they could value our lives more than their own, what were we fighting for? Commander Thule entered the classroom carrying a thick folder of battle reports. The cadets noticed his hands shaking slightly as he set the documents on his desk. This story was different from the others. This one had broken something inside, him that never healed. The largest battle I ever fought was at Titan Base, Thule began. Saturn's largest moon, humanity's primary military installation in their home system. Our intelligence said it held 10,000 human defenders. The Galactic Command sent 100,000 soldiers across 12 assault ships to take it. The holographic display showed Titan Base in its full glory, a massive complex built into the moon's surface with defensive towers reaching toward the black sky. Hangar bays carved into the rock, underground tunnels connecting dozens of facilities. It looked like a fortress that could withstand any attack. General Patricia Hayes commanded the defense, Thule continued. She had 40 years of military experience. Every major human victory in the past decade had her signature on it. Our commanders knew she would be dangerous, but they thought numbers would win the day. The assault began at dawn on a Tuesday. 12 Zephyrian ships surrounded Titan Base and began orbital bombardment. The plan was simple. Destroy the surface defenses, land troops, overwhelm the defenders with superior numbers. The first surprise came when the humans did not take cover. Hayes ordered her forces to attack, Thule explained. Not defend, attack. While we were bombing their base, human squads were launching raids against our landing zones. They hit us while we were still in our ships. Colonel Steve Martinez led the first wave of these attacks. His soldiers used small shuttles to board Zephyrian vessels during the bombardment. They would strike at life support systems, damage engines, sabotage weapons, then escape before anyone could stop them. Martinez lost 300 soldiers in the first day, Thule said. But he disabled 4 of our assault ships. Suddenly we had 8 ships instead of 12. The humans were trading lives for strategic advantage. The second surprise came when Thule's forces finally landed on Titan's surface. The base was not damaged. The orbital bombardment had hit decoy structures. The real defensive positions were hidden underground, connected by tunnels that did not show up on any scan. Major Linda Brooks commanded what Hayes called the ghost units, small teams of soldiers who would appear behind enemy lines, cause massive damage and vanish into the tunnel network. They knew every passage, every entrance, every way in and out. Brooks had been stationed on Titan for 15 years, Thule explained. She knew the base better than the builders. Her teams would hit our supply lines, our communication centers, our medical stations. They were everywhere and nowhere. The third surprise was the most disturbing. As Zephyrian forces pushed deeper into the base, they discovered that the defenders were multiplying instead of decreasing. Every day brought more human soldiers, not fewer. We started with intelligence that said 10,000 defenders, Thule said. By the end of the first week, we were facing 20,000. By the end of the second week, it was 30,000. They were not reinforcing from outside. They were growing from within. Captain Alex Turner was the chief engineer. His job was supposed to be maintaining the base's systems during the siege. Instead, he turned the base itself into a weapon. Every corridor could be sealed. Every room could be flooded with gas or drained of air. Every system could be turned against the invaders. Turner's teams would seal blast doors, cutting off our soldiers from reinforcements, Thule continued. Then they would flood those sections with radiation or poison gas. They were willing to sacrifice entire parts of their own base to stop us. The siege became a nightmare of urban warfare. Zephyrian soldiers would fight for hours to take a single room, only to discover it was booby-trapped. They would secure a section of tunnels only to find themselves cut off when the humans sealed the passages behind them. We had superior numbers, superior weapons, superior technology, Thule said. But the humans had something we did not understand. They had the will to turn their own home into a battlefield. The breakthrough came in the third week when Thule's intelligence officers captured a human supply depot. The documents they found revealed the truth about the multiplying defenders. The 10,000 soldiers had become 50,000 when every civilian on the base took up arms. Scientists, engineers, cooks, clerks, janitors, teachers, Thule listed. Anyone who could hold a weapon joined the defense. Children as young as 16 were carrying ammunition. Grandparents in their 70s were spotting targets for artillery. Dr. Elizabeth Moore was the base's chief medical officer. She was 63 years old and had never fired a weapon in combat. When the siege began, she organized the civilian medical staff to treat wounded soldiers. When casualties mounted, she picked up a rifle and began fighting alongside them. Dr. Moore's medical teams would treat our wounded prisoners during the day, Thule said. Then they would fight against us at night. They saw no contradiction in this. Healing and fighting were both part of their duty. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was devastating. How do you fight an enemy where everyone is a soldier? How do you distinguish between combatants and civilians when there is no difference? A janitor named Robert Chen set off a bomb that killed 40 of my soldiers, Thule continued. A teacher named Mary Lopez led a squad that held off our advance for 6 hours. A cook named Paul Davis used kitchen equipment to make explosives that destroyed 2 of our armored vehicles. The worst part was the children. Human law said that anyone under 18 was too young for combat, but those laws had been written for peacetime. During the siege, necessity became the only law that mattered. I watched a 16-year-old girl named Katie Williams carry wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire, Thule said quietly. She made 12 trips across open ground while plasma bolts were flying everywhere. She saved 18 lives that day. The horror was not that the humans used child soldiers. The horror was that the children volunteered. They saw the danger and chose to face it anyway. They wanted to protect their families, their friends, their home. 17-year-old Marcus Thompson died trying to disarm a bomb in the civilian quarters, Thule continued. He could have run. He could have let someone else handle it. Instead, he stayed and saved 300 people. He was still a child. General. Hayes had turned Titan Base into something beyond a military installation. It became a community where everyone shared the burden of defense. Every person, regardless of age or training, became part of the resistance. The siege tactics evolved as the weeks passed. Human forces would abandon sections of the base, letting Zephyrian soldiers occupy them, then cut off their supplies and communications. The invaders would find themselves isolated in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies who knew every hiding place. We would take a section of tunnels after hours of fighting, Thule explained. Then we would discover that all the air recyclers had been sabotaged, or the water lines had been cut, or the food supplies had been poisoned. We were winning battles but losing the war. Colonel Martinez developed what he called harassment protocols. Small teams would disable life support in sections occupied by Zephyrian forces, forcing them to retreat to smaller and smaller defensive positions. The humans were not trying to kill every invader. They were trying to make occupation impossible. Martinez would hit our positions at night when we were trying to rest, Thule said. His teams would cut power lines, jam communication systems, trigger false alarms. We could not sleep. We could not eat in peace. We could not trust any room or passage. The breaking point came in the 6th week. Zephyrian casualties had reached 40,000 soldiers. Nearly half the invasion force was dead, wounded, or missing. The humans still controlled most of the base. Major Brooks led the final human offensive. Her ghost units emerged from hidden passages throughout the base simultaneously. They hit every Zephyrian position at once, causing chaos and confusion. It was not an attempt to drive out the invaders. It was a demonstration of what the humans could do if they chose total war. Brooks could have killed every one of my remaining soldiers that night, Thule said. Her teams had the positions, the weapons, the knowledge. Instead, she sent a message to our command ship. One word: leave. The message was clear. The humans were showing restraint, but that restraint could end at any time. They had the power to turn the siege into a massacre. They were choosing not to use it. Captain Turner's final gift was the most disturbing. As Zephyrian forces prepared to evacuate, he activated the base's communication system. Every screen in the complex showed the same image, a list of names. 43,000 Zephyrian soldiers, Thule said. Every one of us who had participated in the siege. Our names, ranks, homeworlds, family information. Turner had been collecting intelligence on us for 6 weeks. The message was simple. The humans knew who they were fighting. They knew where the Zephyrian soldiers came from. They knew about their families, their homes, their lives. They could have used this information to strike back at Zephyrian worlds. They chose not to. We evacuated Titan Base with 23,000 survivors, Thule continued. 77,000 casualties to take a base that we never actually controlled. The humans had won by refusing to let us win. Commander Thule looked older today. The scars on his face seemed deeper, the weight of memory heavier on his shoulders. He sat down slowly before beginning his fourth tale, as if the words themselves caused him pain. The most disturbing encounter I had with humans was not on a battlefield, Thule said quietly. It was in a field hospital on Proxima Centauri B, a place where the rules of war should have protected everyone, where healing should have mattered more than fighting. The cadets leaned forward. They had expected another story of human combat, prowess. Instead, their instructor was talking about medicine. My unit was fighting a brutal ground campaign, Thule continued. House-to-house combat in the colonial cities. Both sides were taking heavy casualties. The wounded were piling up faster than either army could treat them. The holographic display showed a temporary medical facility. Canvas tents connected by covered walkways. Red cross symbols marked every building. It looked peaceful compared to the destroyed cityscape around it. We captured the human field hospital during a night raid, Thule explained. Standard procedure was to interrogate the medical staff for intelligence, then process them as prisoners of war. We expected them to cooperate. Medical personnel usually understand the value of staying alive. Dr. Susan Grant was the chief medical officer. She had been working in combat zones for 15 years, saving lives under the worst possible conditions. When Zephyrian soldiers surrounded her hospital, she did not surrender her equipment or abandon her patients. She made a request that stunned every Zephyrian officer present. Dr. Grant asked to continue treating wounded soldiers, Thule said, both human and alien. She said her oath to do no harm applied to everyone, regardless of species. She wanted to keep working while we questioned her. The Zephyrian commanders thought this was perfect. They could extract information from the medical staff while the humans worked. They could learn about human medical techniques, supply lines, and casualty rates. It seemed like an ideal situation. They had no idea what they were walking into. Nurse Peter Kim was Dr. Grant's senior assistant. He had spent 10 years working in military hospitals, treating everything from combat wounds to diseases. When the Zephyrians took over the facility, he volunteered to work without guard supervision. Kim said that medical neutrality was sacred, Thule continued, that healing transcended politics and warfare. He asked only for permission to save lives, nothing more. The first shock came when Thule watched Dr. Grant perform emergency surgery on Major Crix Valdor, a Zephyrian officer who had been critically wounded in the fighting. Valdor was the same officer who had ordered the bombing of a human civilian shelter 3 days earlier, killing hundreds of innocent people. Dr. Grant knew this. Her own sister had died in that bombing. She operated on him anyway. I watched her work for 6 hours, Thule said. Repairing internal organs, stopping bleeding, replacing damaged tissue. She never hesitated, never showed anger or hatred. She treated her sister's killer with the same care she gave to her own soldiers. Medic Angela Price was even more disturbing. She was young, maybe 25 human years old. She had joined the medical corps to save lives, not to fight wars. When Zephyrian casualties started arriving at the hospital, she volunteered to treat them personally. Price had lost her entire family when we destroyed her hometown, Thule explained. Parents, siblings, grandparents, everyone she loved was dead because of our actions. But she spent 18 hours a day treating our wounded soldiers. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was immediate and devastating. How do you maintain hatred for an enemy who saves your life? How do you fight people who treat your wounds with more care than your own military doctors? Our soldiers started asking questions, Thule continued. If humans were monsters, why were they healing us? If we were right to fight them, why did they show us such kindness? The medical staff worked around the clock. Dr. Grant taught Zephyrian, medics advanced trauma treatment techniques. Nurse Kim organized blood drives where human soldiers donated blood to save Zephyrian lives. Medic Price learned basic Zephyrian anatomy so she could provide better care. They were not just treating symptoms, Thule said. They were teaching us how to save lives. Human medical knowledge that had taken decades to develop was being shared freely with their enemies. The most disturbing incident came when orderly Carl Johnson was killed by friendly fire. A Zephyrian pilot trying to provide air support accidentally hit the hospital during a night raid. Johnson was evacuating wounded Zephyrian soldiers from the impact zone when the bombs fell. Johnson could have saved himself, Thule said quietly. He had time to reach cover. Instead, he carried 3 wounded soldiers to safety. The last bomb hit just as he was going back for a 4th. Johnson's final words were recorded by Sergeant Thex Morvac, a Zephyrian soldier he was carrying to the medical tent. Even while dying, Johnson apologized for not being able to help more people. I cannot save them all, Johnson whispered. Tell their families I tried. The orderly's death broke something inside the Zephyrian soldiers. Here was a human who had died trying to save enemies who would have killed him without hesitation. His last thoughts were not of revenge or hatred, but of the people he could not help. Our morale collapsed, Thule admitted. Half my soldiers asked to be transferred to other units. They could not fight an enemy who valued their lives more than their own safety. Dr. Grant continued working even after Johnson's death. She treated the pilot who had dropped the bombs, a young Zephyrian flyer who was suffering from severe guilt and trauma. She spent hours talking to him, helping him understand that accidents happen in war. She told him that Johnson would not want him to suffer, Thule said. That healing was more important than blame. She helped the pilot who killed her friend to forgive himself. Nurse Kim organized a memorial service for Johnson that included both human and Zephyrian soldiers. He spoke about the orderly's dedication to saving lives regardless of uniform or species. He read letters from Zephyrian families thanking Johnson for saving their loved ones. Kim said that Johnson's death proved the value of every life, Thule continued. That mourning together was the first step toward peace. The breaking point came when Medic Price was assigned to treat Captain Drex Korhan, the Zephyrian officer, who had personally led the attack on her hometown. Korhan had taken shrapnel to the chest and was bleeding internally. Without immediate surgery, he would die within the hour. Price knew who he was. She had seen his face in the intelligence briefings. She knew he was responsible for destroying everything she had ever loved. She operated on him for 8 hours. I watched her save the life of her family's killer, Thule said. She never wavered, never hesitated. When Korhan woke up 3 days later, the first thing he saw was Price checking his vital signs. The captain asked why she had saved him. Price's answer became legendary among both human and Zephyrian forces. Because you are hurt, she said simply. That is all that matters here. The psychological warfare was complete. Zephyrian soldiers could no longer see humans as enemies. They were healers who happened to be wearing different uniforms. They were people who put medical ethics above military orders. Our intelligence gathering was useless, Thule explained. Every question was answered honestly. Supply routes, troop movements, tactical plans. The humans told us everything because they saw no conflict between healing and honesty. Dr. Grant even shared classified medical research that could help treat Zephyrian genetic diseases. Information that had taken years to develop was given freely to improve enemy healthcare. She said that knowledge belonged to anyone who could use it to reduce suffering, Thule continued. That medical advancement was not a military secret, but a humanitarian duty. The final shock came when the field hospital was scheduled for evacuation. Zephyrian Command wanted to relocate the medical staff to extract more information. Dr. Grant made one last request. She asked to stay and continue treating Zephyrian wounded. She had no reason to help us, Thule said. We were enemies. We had destroyed her cities, killed her people, captured her hospital, but she wanted to keep healing our soldiers because they needed medical care. Nurse Kim volunteered to stay as well. He said that wounded soldiers were not enemies, just patients who needed help. Medic Price asked only that she be allowed to train more Zephyrian medics before the evacuation. They were offering to become prisoners permanently if it meant saving more lives. Thule explained. They valued our soldiers' health more than their own freedom. The Zephyrian command refused the request. The medical staff was too valuable as prisoners to be left behind. But the offer had already done its damage. Word spread throughout the Zephyrian army that human doctors wanted to stay and help them. Morale among our forces never recovered, Thule admitted. How do you fight an enemy who loves your soldiers more than you do? How do you maintain discipline when the opposition treats your wounded better than your own officers? The war in that sector ended 6 weeks later. Not through military victory, but through mass surrender. Zephyrian soldiers were laying down their weapons and asking to be taken to human medical facilities for treatment. Commander Thule entered the classroom for the final time. His cadets noticed he carried no files, no holographic displays, no battle reports, just an old wooden box that he placed carefully on his desk. The weight of 5 years of memories seemed to press down on his shoulders. 5 years have passed since the Third Galactic War ended, Thule began. Today I attended a memorial service on my home world. Humans and Zephyrians gathered together to honor the dead from both sides. What I witnessed there was more terrifying than any battle I have ever described to you. The cadets looked confused. A memorial service could not be more frightening than combat. But they had learned to trust their instructor's words, no matter how strange they seemed. The humans sent a delegation to our world, Thule continued, led by Ambassador Helen Clark, many of whom had fought against my forces during the war. I expected anger, demands for reparations, political maneuvering. Instead, they came to grieve with us. Ambassador Clark had served as a communications officer during the Titan base siege. She had coordinated the resistance that cost Thule 77,000 soldiers. Now she stood in the Zephyrian capital, laying flowers at a monument dedicated to alien war dead. Clark spoke to me personally, Thule said. She asked about my injuries, about my recovery, about the soldiers who served under my command. She knew their names. She had studied casualty reports and memorized the faces of enemies she had helped to kill. General William Scott was part of the human delegation. He had commanded the forces that defended Titan base, turning the siege into a nightmare of urban warfare. Thule expected him to be arrogant in victory, proud of his tactical brilliance. Instead, Scott sought out Zephyrian veterans to apologize. Scott found me during the reception, Thule explained. He said he was sorry for the pain his strategies had caused, not sorry for defending his people, but sorry that defense required so much death. He spoke about the shared burden of survival. The general knew the names of Zephyrian officers who had died during the siege. He carried letters from their families, messages of gratitude for soldiers who had fought with honor even in defeat. He had spent 5 years learning about the enemies he had killed. Scott told me about Lieutenant Vex Karan, who died trying to save wounded humans during a tunnel collapse, Thule continued. About Captain Drex Morian, who shared his rations with human prisoners. About Sergeant Thek Williams, who carried a wounded human child to safety under fire. The humans had been watching. Even during the worst fighting, they noticed acts of kindness and courage from their enemies. They remembered Zephyrian soldiers who chose mercy over brutality, compassion over cruelty. Dr. Sarah Bennett was the third member of the delegation. She had developed trauma treatments during the war that saved thousands of soldiers on both sides. Now she offered to train Zephyrian medical personnel in advanced techniques. Dr. Bennett brought medical supplies as gifts, Thule said. Equipment worth millions of credits, given freely to help us care for our veterans. She said that healing was not a human monopoly but a universal responsibility. The ceremony's most powerful moment came when Colonel Tom Bradley approached the memorial wall. Bradley's unit had been responsible for some of the war's most devastating human victories. His tactical innovations had killed more Zephyrian soldiers than any other human commander. He carried a wreath made from flowers grown on human worlds. Bradley read the names of Zephyrian war dead, Thule continued. All 43,000 of them. It took him 6 hours. He pronounced each name carefully, respectfully. He had spent years learning proper Zephyrian pronunciation. The colonel's speech acknowledged that every victory came at a cost neither side fully understood at the time. He spoke about the families left behind, the futures cut short, the dreams that would never be fulfilled. Bradley said that winning was not the same as being right, Thule explained. That military success meant nothing if it did not lead to lasting peace. Ambassador Clark's address revealed the most disturbing truth about human nature. She presented a complete list of Zephyrian soldiers whose lives had been saved by human medics during the war. 847 names. Enemies who owed their survival to human compassion. Clark said that every life saved was a victory for both sides, Thule continued, that the war's true measure was not territory conquered or battles won, but people who lived to see peace. The memorial included something that shocked every Zephyrian present. A section dedicated to civilian casualties. Human architects had designed a garden where families could remember loved ones lost in the fighting. They made space for Zephyrian civilians who died in human attacks. They honored our innocent dead alongside their own, Thule said quietly. No distinction between human and alien grief. No separation between our loss and theirs. The psychological impact was overwhelming. Zephyrian veterans found themselves comforted by former enemies. Human soldiers shared stories about Zephyrian friends they had made during prisoner exchanges. Former combatants discovered they had more in common than they realized. General Scott introduced me to Private Danny Chen, Thule continued. Chen had lost his leg during the Titan base siege. He wanted to thank the Zephyrian medic who had saved his life after he was wounded. The medic was Corporal Vex-High Dunn, one of Thule's own soldiers. Dunn had risked his life to treat wounded humans during a ceasefire. Chen had spent 5 years searching for him, wanting to express his gratitude. They embraced like old friends, Thule said. Former enemies who had become brothers through shared suffering. Dr. Bennett organized medical seminars where human and Zephyrian doctors worked together. They shared techniques, compared treatments, learned from each other's experiences. Knowledge that had been classified during the war was now freely exchanged. Bennett said that medical advancement belonged to everyone, Thule explained, that diseases and injuries did not respect species boundaries. The most disturbing revelation came during a private conversation between Thule and Ambassador Clark. She revealed that humans had developed weapons capable of destroying entire Zephyrian worlds, planet killers that could have ended the war in days. They had chosen not to use them. Clark said that winning through genocide was not winning at all, Thule continued, that preserving enemy civilians was more important than military victory. The weapons had been built as a deterrent, a way to force peace negotiations, but human leadership had refused to deploy them even when their own worlds were threatened. They valued alien life too much to commit mass murder. They could have killed billions of us, Thule said. Instead, they chose to fight a longer, more difficult war that preserved civilian populations on both sides. Colonel Bradley revealed another secret. Human intelligence had identified the locations of Zephyrian civilian shelters, hospitals, and schools. This information was used to avoid targeting them, even when it made military operations more dangerous. Bradley's forces took higher casualties because they refused to bomb civilian targets, Thule explained. They made their own soldiers die, to keep our families safe. The memorial service included a moment of silence for all war dead. Humans and Zephyrians stood together, heads bowed, remembering the cost of conflict. Former enemies shared their grief as if they had always been allies. I stood next to General Scott, Thule said, the man who had defeated me at Titan Base. We mourned the same losses, honored the same sacrifices. The war seemed like ancient history. Ambassador Clark's final speech challenged every assumption about human nature. She spoke about the future, about cooperation between species, about the lessons learned through suffering. Clark said that humans were not superior to other species. Thule continued. They were simply committed to the idea that all life had value. That commitment made them fight harder, sacrifice more, and forgive faster than anyone expected. The ceremony ended with the presentation of a joint memorial, a monument that would stand in the Zephyrian capital, bearing the names of war dead from both sides. Human and alien casualties listed together without distinction. They insisted on honoring our dead alongside theirs, Thule said, as if nationality and species meant nothing compared to the sacrifice of life. As Thule concluded his tale, he opened the wooden box on his desk. Inside was a medal, the Zephyrian Cross of Valor, the highest military honor his people could bestow. This medal was given to Private Amy Foster, Thule explained, the human soldier who fought for 17 minutes with fatal wounds during the mining colony battle. It was presented to her family by our government. The cadets stared at the medal. A human had been honored by their enemies for fighting against them. The contradiction seemed impossible. The humans taught us the most terrifying lesson of all, Thule said. They showed us that winning a war means nothing if you lose your humanity in the process. That real victory comes from preserving what makes life worth living. One cadet raised her hand. Commander, if humans are so compassionate, why are they the most feared species in the galaxy? Thule smiled sadly. Because they never stop being compassionate, even when it would be easier to hate. They will kill you to protect others, then risk their lives to save yours. They will destroy entire fleets to preserve the idea that every life has value.